All right, welcome back everyone to the presentation. Rod will start here in just a minute. Let me do a screen share. Okay. This involves, which is the switch? This one?
The mouse control.
Oh, total mouse control. And this is going to have an element at the end of it that is, well, it's quite old. And I didn't, and I had almost finished the model that we're going to be using and set it on the top shelf in my bedroom, thinking I had finished it. I thought, well, this would be a good presentation. When I took it down, I realized that I had not, in fact. So I hustled and got a lot more done, but it's still not finished. I did want it to be, and you'll see why. You know who HRSMS is? Silk Purse Productions. The last time I put this logo up, everybody laughed, and I wonder if, I hope everybody got it. I do a lot of restorations and conservations, and many of the people that bring me their vessels for restoration or confirmation have what we would call a sow's ear, and never will be a silk purse. But that's the thing. I make silk purses from sow's ears many times. One of the models I got, I said, the best thing for you to do would be put it in the dumpster and forget about it. His wife said, Mr. Lewis, you are our last hope, and this is a family icon. Guilt took over, and I finished the restoration for them. The sad part is he died months after I gave the model back to him. But anyway, here we go. Conservation versus restoration, OPM. We'll talk about the OPMs later. But first, let's establish what we're working with. We build models. Shipyards and designers build models. Metalsmiths and jewelers build models. Some are functional, some are teaching devices. Some guide and have guided for centuries the works of contractors, builders of skyscrapers, automobiles, houses, cities, ships. We build models primarily for display, objects of art. If we return to an earlier model we've made 5, 10, 15, 50 years ago, we intend to repair, renew, or improve that work of art. We may employ whatever methods, tools, techniques we wish. The outcome may or may not satisfy us, but there are no consequences either way. It was our model, it remains ours, so we're obligated to no specific outcome. It is what it is in discussion. Now, let's allow a second party in on the project. Could be just someone who approaches you and asks politely, can you fix my boat? Or you're in this taco stand, or at an IPMS, NRG convention, and a visitor approaches John, or Charles, or Rylan. I've seen your work. I have a model that needs a little repair. Can you take a look at it? Here's an example of a common repair problem. This model was on display in Deltaville Maritime Museum when a fire broke out in an adjacent building. By the time the fire was extinguished, almost all of the workboat models had suffered damage, some more than others. This one, model of the Ward Brothers buyboat, was drenched to the extent that the hatch covers buckled. The finish was bubbled and scorched. The fuel tank had melted and other minor damage had occurred. When the model was received for repair, it had 2 loading booms, both on goosenecks. Doesn't work. Now, this sort of repair that can be accomplished rather quickly, well, it's not the sort of thing I'm talking about. Let's say it's this model that needs a little repair. This is Deltaville's model. What? Everybody's built this one. And it's the Willie Bennett, right? Skipjack. So first, this is clearly not a quick fix. So we have to back up a bit. OPMs, other people's models. The situation, believe it or not, has changed dramatically. Now we have the OPM factor, other people's models. You have a wide choice of answers to the fix my boat question. First one I would think that comes to mind. No, sir, no, I could not take a look at it. Now you can go home and sleep comfortably, build your own models. Or, sure, I'll take a look at it. And I can't read this. Let you know whether or not I would have time or skill to effect the repair. B, take some photos, show it to my colleagues, and see if there's any interest in taking it on. Or C, advise a repair resource that could repair it for you at a reasonable price. How do we get that top bar out?
We'll go over the three dots, all the way over to the
Which way?
right.
All right.
Okay.
That's good enough. Okay. One of these responses has potential impact on your future. It's that one. To move this discussion forward, we must assume that upon examination and assessment of the needed repair, you accept the job, doing a little repair on someone else's model that you did not build. We're dealing with a work of art, whether it's a museum quality or a paint by numbers quality, it's a work of art. And it ain't yours. There are 4 well-defined processes that may be followed. First of these is preservation. Preservation involves stabilizing a deteriorating object. It requires strict adherence to the object of preservation. The objective is to protect from further destruction, from further alteration. If this is the process required to achieve the owner's result, no new or foreign materials or techniques may be used. No new materials may be added. No part of the process would indelibly alter the object. This is a preserved model of a votive ship of the 16th century. Looks great, huh? This is already conserved. It's as far as you can go. You can't add anything or subtract it. For a dedicated ship model not employed by a museum, this process will not come up very often. Second, renovation. Second process is one that would allow the most liberal and creative work. The object is simply a starting point. The owner's parameters, imagination, materials, you can ignore within those parameters techniques, original appearance, even scale, even authenticity. Renovation imposes very few restrictions. Here's a recent renovation. All that was salvageable, believe it or not, to return this hull is the hull, the masts, the boom, even the bulwarks and the rails had to be replaced. These are block cut devices that seem to serve as the deck furniture. This incidentally is a Gertrude L. Thibault. They had to be replaced to come up with a model that looks more authentic, satisfies the owner's objective. Now, the third is conservation. Conservation is most closely linked to preservation. The difference is that repairs and additions may be employed, but with the original object dictating the techniques or the materials. Again, as with preservation, no repair or addition is irreversible. Here are two examples of conserved artifacts from the USS Monitor. Conservation involves using, quote, any methods that prove effective in keeping that property in as close to its original condition as possible, for as long as is possible. So while it's immediate in terms of halting a deteriorating situation, it's ongoing in the sense that it requires inspection and maintenance into the future. Don't get strapped into this one. Let the owner continue the conservation after you've finished the first part. By the way, if the project involves cultural heritage, there may be some strict ethical guidelines. Know what they are. Again, unless you're working for a museum, this won't come up very often. This is a tobacco canoe that was used on the James River to ferry tobacco up and down. Jamestown was going to do an exposition on that. And we were willing to lend them our tobacco canoe that belongs to the museum, but they didn't like it. They wanted it cleaned up and changed. So instead, I built a tobacco canoe for the exhibit. Kind of fun. I'd never done that before. But by the way, the canoe parts themselves are maple. I warn you, trying to carve maple into a dugout canoe is like trying to carve iron with a butter knife. Use pine if you're ever going to make one of those. And the fourth, of course, is restoration. The fourth process is sort of self-explanatory. The intent is to bring the object back to its original condition or a former condition. The owner of the object's history determined the finished appearance of the object. As opposed to renovation, restoration has a very specific goal in mind. The finished product becomes the project moved back in time to an earlier and probably handsomer appearance. Here's a recent restoration. I had to guess at some of the rigging and the intensity of color. The owner's goal was to restore the Staysail fishing schooner, probably Greek or Portuguese, to its like new condition. Hope we did a pretty good job on that one. Now, with all this newfound knowledge, here's a model that's gone through one of the processes. Which process do you think? Here's another. Santa Maria, this is a votive model. And here's the what? Restoration? Conservation? Well, the company that worked on this one calls it a restoration. The name of the company is Ship Model Restoration. Pretty clever. They must have known a great deal about this model when they took it in because, frankly, I think they were just showing how they would have built a votive Santa Maria. By the way, appraisals never offer even estimates of value, period, even if you know. This French prisoner of war model, bone model, it's neither a French model nor is it a bone model. Sometimes it doesn't take long to evaluate an artifact. Sometimes it requires an expert with microscopes and analytical devices. You could easily be an innocent accomplice to fraud. In any event, it's those last two processes that we'll be dealing with. Most often, in our avocation, most often will occur of all of them. So let's examine more closely the steps to be taken when we agree to a product of conservation or restoration. Something's going to happen here, I'm sure. What did I do wrong?
You're writing over on the left side, go to the very top. Yeah, like that.
There. Yeah, I need to go back one because I don't know whether I missed something or not. Nope, that's it. Okay, we're good.
You run that toolbar on the side by clicking that red X.
Okay. There. Assessment. All these things are important. Contract and receipt and the hold harmless clause, we talk about time frame, flexibility. Third step, research. Photos, plans, other like models, history. They all relate to this. Photos, incidentally, you cannot have too many photos of the original, of the before pictures. And process, your work schedule, materials and tools, and your workspace. So all of this is preparatory. Now that you've accepted the challenge, you'll need to prepare an assessment of the work you intend. This is a two-parter. Part one, define the vessel and the areas in need of work. Part two, outline your approach to each of the deficiencies and the methods, materials needed, and the approximate date of completion. Your assessment may, in some cases, be done under the watchful eye of the owner. Where it seems appropriate, I would suggest in this case having an item on hand you may not typically use. White gloves makes you look more professional. They'll think you're either a cartoon or a magician. A magician will be good. In some cases, many cases, in fact, you won't need them, but they do send a message. In part one, be as accurate as possible and fully justify all of your proposed work. Use the correct nautical terms for the type of craft, the approximate time frame of the real vessel, if such, the names of stays, the vang, topping lifts, the deck charge, launchers, Y guns, K guns. Find the vessel on the internet if necessary, and you'll have good info. In part two, be liberal with your time. Be liberal with your estimates. This one took 94 hours. This one took 42 hours. This one took 131 hours. And the clipper I spoke of earlier took 1,700 hours. That's the one I tried to turn down. But it was a good ending to that also. Cover everything that you think may be required. Charles Landrum took a Maersk model to repair. Maersk had three models of their ships delivered here. One of them was damaged, and Charles did a full estimate of the nature of repair that he would have to do, and found further damage inside the model that was irreparable. I think the museum ended up getting that one. But be thorough, be accurate. Once the assessment is done, name your projected price, which includes anticipated costs for items needed directly to you, and submit the assessment to the owner for approval or modification. I've copied an assessment, incidentally, from a firm that doesn't do conservations anymore. The American Marine Model Gallery. It's a very good assessment, though. I'll be happy to provide it to you if you're in that situation where you need that. However, it was written in 1984, and as I said, they don't do conservations anymore. So, you have accepted the challenge. Part one is define the vessel and the areas and take close-ups of the damaged areas. Part two, outline your approach in each of the deficiencies and the methods and materials needed, the approximate date of completion. Your assessment may, in some cases, be done with the owner. But a contract does a lot of things for you as far as protecting. Now, let me get down to where I was. And we will continue. Protect yourself. I use a sort of contract that tells the owner what I intend and protects Mariners Museum. Simply, the agreed upon assessment with lines for yours and the owner's signature. 2 copies. Here's an even safer strategy. Have the owner fill in a ship model restoration questionnaire. This agreement may give you a free hand, carte blanche, which will be good if you, in your work, or it may be very limiting. At that point, you may need to rethink your willingness to take on the project. But even if the owner is critically specific, include some language that affords some flexibility. This, needless to say, will vary from case to case. Unless this is a familiar vessel to you, the next step is research. Depending on the extent or damage determination, you may wish or need to find solid references to guide you to a satisfactory conclusion of the project. Particularly, rigging changed from ship to ship, from period to period. I'll show you an example in a few minutes. But here's another problem. You're not starting with this, plank on frame, plank on mold. You're starting with this. Working within existing rigging will deny you the logical procedures you've always followed in building. This is the completed Willie Bennett, incidentally, for Delta Build. It has a dredge hauler upper that was always hand operated. But by the time we got to the Willie Bennett stay, they added a little gasoline engine. This shelter fits over the gasoline engine, hides it. So none of the kits you buy will tell you how to put that engine in. I went to Chesapeake Bay Maritime Museum, took several pictures of their engines, and built it. Now, how could I expose it? It will be covered. Well, I moved the cover back. That's toolbox. We're working on that motor. That's why it's exposed. And just something you could add, little stuff that makes it a little bit more fun, I guess. Now let's get to work. You have a conservation restoration lab. It's your work stand. Clear all else and take about 150 photos of your project. Stem to stern, port to starboard. Be absolutely sure that you and your client know what the original project looked like, the befores photos. Then I would suggest writing out a schedule for yourself based on your typical building strategy. Clear the decks. Better situation. First thing you're going to do is clean the ship. I have a technique for that. You'll have your own techniques for it. I start with an airbrush with nothing in it and blow all the dust out. Second is sweeping with a soft paintbrush. And third might be going to the ship with an airbrush with deionized water in it. And area by area, clean it up as best you can. Then with the hull stripped as much as is practical, begin hull repairs. Personally, I take off all the furniture first, the necessary items on the top of the ship, and just work on the hull. At this point, don't need to tell you how to build a model. Just remember that at best, carte blanche, you have to unbuild before you build. And if the original builder used, let's say epoxy, you're going to have a hell of a time getting the stuff off of the ship. Anyway, it's time consuming. When it's done, you're just building a model with hopefully some of the construction already done for you. Plans for the particular model would be a godsend, but if you don't have access to them, and you won't often have access, the most valuable part of the plans, in this case, would be the steps in the building process. And as I said, you might not have that. So, if necessary, move as much of the furniture, superstructure, and rigging as possible. Be careful close-ups photos of the worst damage or decay. The owner may not recall having seen it every day, the extent of the problem. Make sure that he or she does understand the extent. Now, delivery date. I would suggest this. You've researched the original. Print or write a brief history with a color photo of the vessel. If there's no vitrine, make a carrying box of heavy corrugated cardboard or wood custom fitted to the model such that it will protect against any projections. Yards and booms are the most vulnerable. Stays, bowsprits. I would suggest before unveiling the finished product, review the befores with your owner. Remind him or her what this ship looked like when it came to you. They may need a reminder. You prepared a receipt that verifies the return, briefly restates the work you've done, includes copies of receipts for any needed supplies. It may offer a section for comments. If a nod to the original builder is appropriate, word it in terms of praise and admiration for his work. Get the owner's signature, give him a copy with your signature. You may also offer a guarantee for the work you've done. Putting yourself on the spot, but you can do that. And that's it. Once you become a known sucker for this work, you may get some unusual requests. Here's a repair I did last, 3 or 4 years ago for one of the members of the Mariners Board of Trustees. It's a waterfowl carving with obviously a broken wing. It was done by an artist on the Eastern Shore whose carvings now command a premium price in the tens of thousands of dollars. I was a little nervous about this one. That's how it came out. Pretty proud of it. And here's a J80, a racing yacht. The owner wanted the jib reattached to the forestay. I went a little farther and created a roller furling for his jib. He loved it. Which brings us to another point governing all of this. Do you want to do it? As an avocation, model building is not a lucrative pursuit. As a business, I think it can be. I don't charge for my work, but my agreement with the owners always states that at the satisfactory completion of my work, the owner will make a contribution to the general fund of the Mariners Museum. Since Deltaville, these contributions have amounted to just over $20,000 in total. So if you're doing it for your own profit, $20,000 doing the things you love to do. Deltaville's work was done, of course, gratis because they're a museum. Some work for NOAA, some work for a museum in Carolina, gratis because they're museums. But therein may lie a source of income if you are so predisposed. You should look into forming a legitimate self-owned business or a limited liability company of some sort. It will offer you protection and some tax advantages. Now, brief word about sailing ships and their prominent characteristics. A recent receipt was this Chesapeake Bay workboat. It was brought to me as a Chesapeake Bay schooner. What is it? Skipjack. Why is it not a sloop? Because the watermen on the Chesapeake Bay chose to call it a skipjack. It's clearly a sloop rigged. Your customer, if you will, may know nothing about the original craft that his model represents. It's an opportunity to educate him. You may, in this case, very briefly outline the evolution of the skipjack from the bug eye, the sailing log canoe, the dugout. First, it establishes your authority. And second, increases the owner's confidence in your work. Third, the owner can proudly display his model and answer questions about it. My experience is that much of the work at any level of effort was centered on fore and aft rigged sailing craft. They're the most popular vessels found in home decor. It would help if you could identify the vessel to the prospective customer before you accept the project. Here's a brief ID tutorial based on the types of ships. This is a pond yacht. These toy boats found in abundance throughout the early years of the 20th century and now in antique shops and junk stores and attics will be typically built like this. Identifying the characteristic, lead keel. Model doesn't need a lead keel. Pond yacht does. You may also find the inventive steering system intact. Confusing, but simple when you look at its operation. Here's one I did a few years ago. It was painted green on the port side because the owner's decor was predominantly green, so she simply painted that side of her yacht green. Well, I kind of repainted it. Pond yacht can be very generic, but more specific, such as model of the Columbia, you'll need to recognize the vessel by its rigging, its hull shape, sail plan, number of masts that start with the simple single pole mast types. A catboat's mast is mounted far forward. It won't carry a jib or foresail, only a triangular main. It may, in older versions, carry more sails from a gaff rig. The sloop, one of the most common, steps one mast and typically two sails, a Bermuda rig mainsail and a headsail. The headsail may be rigged with its peak at the top of the mast, or, depending on the size and number of crew, the peak may be bent at a point below the mast, below the top. A dinghy is a typical, smaller than other sailboats, and primarily used in training, youth programs, tenders to larger boats. They will have three sails, main, jib, and spinnaker, but may carry fewer. Cutters may be uncommon in your restoration work. A typical cutter has one mast and a mainsail, but the mast is stepped further to allow for the addition of a jib or a staysail to prevent the head stay and the inner forestay. These terms may be confusing in some circumstances, but they do have specific meaning. I've just completed restoration on a revenue cutter from 1853, and she carried two masts. So you have to look at context also. Ketches are somewhat similar to sloops, but a second shorter mast is stepped astern of the main, is called the mizzen, term from Arabic meaning balance. In other words, it balances the strength of the foresail. She may also carry head sails like the cutter. Schooner is two-masted, and the main is taller than the foremast, but she may carry three masts. In this case, the foremast will always be shorter than the foremost main. And last, in this abbreviated tutorial, the yawl. Yawl is a southern boat. The yawl, very much like a ketch, but with a shorter mizzen mast stepped astern of the rudder to balance the helm. You'll also encounter some square rigged vessels. Square rigged vessels may be generally called ships, but unless they were built before 1800 or so, they may not be. Everybody recognizes, I'm sure, the Constitution. Everybody recognizes Crabtree's ship. Ship? Well, the word ship specifically, after the 1800s, referred to a vessel with a bowsprit and three or more masts carrying square rigged sails. Constitution. Lexington, but it's not the Lexington, as you may know, Mr. Crabtree's. Now, some time ago, I was wrong in saying it was 2011, I believe it was 2015. This landed at our front door of the museum, in a box, a U-Haul box with a U-Haul blanket around it, and no notes, no nothing. Nobody knew whose it was, but there it was. I presented this some time ago, to the HRSMS. And I said, here we have something that I have taken over. What do you think will be the proper approach to this? Proper approach, of course, would be to take the box, the blanket, and the ship out to the Dempsey dumpster and put it in there. But I gave him options: renovate it, restore it, conserve it, or dumpster. Here was the outcome: 1 vote for conserve, 2 votes for dumpster, 3 votes for renovate, overwhelmingly restore. Now I've given myself a task. This was in 2016, quite a few years ago. Here's another picture of her. Call it a drop and run. I have no idea. No part of it was burned, but it was all soot coated and
A basement where they had a coal-fired furnace.
yeah. Now, I guess assumed, because it might have been a mistake early on, that someone has created this mess to look like a votive ship, an old, I'm thinking 19th century votive ship. So I took ownership of it. Nobody in the museum wanted to even touch it. Looking inside this hold that had no hatch covers on it at all, it's a pine log that was shaped into a hull. Had 6 guns, 3 on each side. There's your monstrous figurehead by apparently a very talented carver. Some of the parts after and before cleaning and applied. Forecastle, maybe? This is cardboard, except for the 2 wood blocks on either side. It's very old and rough cardboard. Here's the forecastle. 100 grit sandpaper for the most part. It was, well, you'll see. Now, you see the date in the lower left-hand corner there. It's 1572. What was significant about 1572? Frankly, I don't know. I know 1571 was Lepanto. That was the last great battle of galleys. This is clearly not a galley. So I looked up 1572, got nothing. But this symbol right here, it's an old Spanish coin from the 17th century, 16th, 17th century. It's best to have a sailmaker close by. This one's close by. She lives with me. Say hi to everybody, Chris. Chris. There you go. Okay. She's my sailmaker. And like I said, it's fortunate she lives with me. So here's one of the masts. You see how cleverly they've done the funnel shrouds? He simply bypassed the crow's nest, wrapped on with wire to the truck. Okay, now we're starting. Clean everything. Put a good coat of white paint on it. Replaced a couple of blocks of wood that were just completely destroyed. We're not done yet, but here she is. Still got some work to do. My sailmaker has made the sails, and this, I just copied this and stuck it on. But I've started getting that pattern in place, and here's a photograph of it. What's wrong with this? Pretty much everything, except it is going to look as much as possible as it did possibly originally.
Can I stop your screen
Yeah,
sharing? And
So, I think we were missing one spar. This was there. It would be the yard for the Latine mizzen. 1572 or anywhere around there, bound to be a Latine mizzen. Wasn't square rigged yet. So I'll probably have to make a new one because that's a little bit too short. The lantern I thought was clever. Of course, it didn't have any innards, so I used a prescription bottle with the red light in there. This was a copy from an old Spanish coin. And that's pretty much it. Be happy to entertain any questions. And if you decide to do this on your own, I hope you're successful financially and spiritually. If you want to fix ships for other folks, there are several ways you can turn them down. You can say no and just leave, which is probably the safest thing sometimes.
Ryan,
No idea. I'd like to know. I'm not sure at all that it was a museum member. We got the word out as quick as we could through conservation and collections. And somebody just left it at the front door overnight. And security found the box the next morning and brought it in.
Well, you got no donation.
Right?
Got no donation.
But it was catch and cat. I didn't sit down with this and work on it as I would have on somebody else's model. So now it becomes my model until or unless somebody claims it. And I would welcome any claim. No proof, just say it's yours and I'll give it to you.
Ron, Joe Lorenzo here.
Yeah.
You're obviously a much more experienced modeler and conservator, let me call it that, than I. I've done a few, and a recent one, which was a family heirloom. I've gotten in the habit of writing a work statement. My background is product development, so I work with work statements that try to bound what I will do, and by exclusion, it's what I won't do. And the recent model, unbeknownst to me, the model had lead paint on it. And that was a first for me. It was pretty old. It was probably less than 100, but more than 75 years old. I had to stop what I was doing because I was removing the paint without caution. And I had to come up with a different way to deal with it. And as a matter of fact, make long story short, I sealed the hull. When you run into problems like that, and I think that it fell, the category I fell into was renovation. Do you, in your contracts, do you go back when you run into a problem akin to that, or do you put an escape clause in your contract? What do you do?
There's an escape clause. If I run into something that, let's say I want to add to the ship for authenticity, I will agree with the owner first that this can be added and give him an idea of how. But I also say this is the work proposed to be done, your model. If any changes occur, you will be contacted before those changes are executed. So I'm still giving the owner some authority, even if it's a total carte blanche agreement, giving the owner some authority. And also saying I expect to finish this by 30 July. If there are any delays, will be because of newfound problems or whatever, and I will contact the owner first. So there's always that opening for the owner to be notified of any changes.
Understood. Logical. Thank you.
There's another thing because of the way I do these things. The last paragraph at first protects the Mariners Museum. In other words, this is my responsibility now. If I drop it or lose it or catches fire, Mariners has no part of this. However, at the completion, I will expect the owner to make a donation at his or her discretion to the general fund of the Mariners Museum. Now, because I'm working for free, if the owner is 70 or more, they can use the required minimum distribution and write a check directly to the Mariners Museum. That's why instead of the $1,000 I might have gotten in the museum, it's $20,000 in the museum because the folks who own it know that they don't even have to do a Schedule A. They just write qualified charitable distribution alongside that line, and they get off tax-free. So, and that's another important part. I don't tell them how much it's going to cost, but I will tell them how many hours will consume in the project itself by me. Thank you, Joe.
Joe?
Yes.
Hi, it's Mort Stahl. I have a question about the restoration, the cleaning. Why do you use or prefer deionized water as opposed to regular bottled water or tap water?
you talked to Ron about,
I
I
met
can
Ron,
answer
I'm
that
sorry.
more.
Thank you.
Distilled water is good too. Deionized water will not react with paints.
Okay,
Tap water doesn't have anything in it, but deionized water will not react with paints. If you're working on, well, that's the whole thing, really. Thank you, Mark.
thank you.
Okay, the original flags are here if you want to take a look at them. They're in pretty bad shape. Yes, sir.
Quick question concerning the finances about that. Yes, you were talking about a qualified, durable.
From a qualified money plan, IRA, let's say, and some are exclusive. But if you have an IRA, that has, and you're over 70, you've got to take a required minimum distribution every year. I think it's 71 now, whatever the age is. You have to take that. If you don't take it, the IRS can surtax the amount that you should have taken by 50%. On the other hand, if you have your IRA, write a check directly to a qualified 501c3 or charitable organization. Write the check directly to them. You have no ownership or receive an all check. Then it's a qualified charitable distribution up to about $125,000. But if your required minimum distribution this year, let's say it's $10,000, you can write a check for $10,000, satisfy your required minimum distribution, not pay tax on it at all. Don't need to schedule A, because the instructions are you just write onto your 1040 QCD, qualified charitable distribution. That's why you see people become much more charitable when they're over 70. Okay, thank you, guys.
How much do you have to drink? How much whiskey do you have to drink when you do that?
About a bottle of scotch a day.
Okay, that's about it.
Yeah, that's right. Summer easier bottle last 2 days.
okay, this ends the meeting. Does anybody have any questions online or want to thank everybody for coming? Okay, well, next month, don't forget the auction. Online, people, y'all are welcome to participate. And, we'll see what we have to, it should be a fun time. And, be a fun meeting. Thank y'all for showing up.
Get more model kits to put under your bed. Eventually, my bed's gonna be off the floor.
Very good. Glad to see you back.